The first thing my daughter said when she saw me in my dress blues was, "Dad, absolutely not." I was standing in the parking lot, outside Street Catherine's Garden Pavilion, one hand on the car door, the medals on my chest catching the morning sunlight. I had pressed every crease into that uniform the night before. My late wife Helen used to tease me that I ironed it harder than I ever ironed a shirt for church, and she was probably right. I had worn that uniform for 26 years. I had worn it through war, funerals, and the day I buried my own wife. I had worn it with pride because it meant something. It meant sacrifice. It meant duty. It meant that when I said I had given my life to something bigger than myself, I wasn't asking anyone to clap. But my daughter, Emily, didn't look at me like a proud bride about to walk down the aisle with her father. She looked at me like I had showed up wearing a costume from somebody else's life. "Dad," she whispered sharply, glancing toward the venue doors where guests were already gathering in silk dresses and tailored suits. "You cannot wear that today." I blinked at her. "It's my uniform. I know what it is." Her voice tightened, and she reached for my arm like she was trying to steer me away from the crowd. "I told you. The wedding theme is elegant, neutral, upscale. My fiancé's family is very particular. We talked about this." "Talked about what?" "About you wearing a regular suit." I looked down at the dark blue jacket, the rows of ribbons, the silver bars on my chest. I had spent half the night polishing my shoes until I could see my own face in them. "Emily, your mother would have wanted me in this uniform." Her jaw moved once quickly. "Mom isn't here." That line hit harder than I expected, not because it was true, but because she said it like it solved everything. I had raised Emily alone after Helen died. She was 12 when I buried my wife, 12 and too young to understand why life could split in half without warning. Back then, she had clung to this uniform like it was a blanket. When she was little, she would drag her hands over the medals and ask me what each one meant. She used to stand in the mirror with one of my old caps sitting sideways on her head and say she was going to marry a man who served his country too. Now she was looking at me like my service was an embarrassing family secret. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "I'm not taking it off." Her eyes flashed. "Dad, please don't do this. I need today to be about me, not your military thing." My military thing. I felt something in me go still. Not angry. Not yet. Just cold. Behind her, the glass doors of the pavilion opened, and a wave of laughter rolled out from the bridal suite. I recognized her fiancé's voice, smooth and polished, and always a little too confident. "Caleb Mercer, investment banker, expensive watch, expensive haircut, expensive opinions." He had walked into my house 2 years ago and shaken my hand with both hands like he was auditioning for the role of the good guy. At first, I had liked him. I was desperate to like him. Any man who made my daughter smile that hard had a chance with me. That feeling had been dying by inches for months. "Emily," I said, "your mother is the reason I'm wearing this." Her face softened for half a second, and then it hardened again, as if some invisible person had whispered in her ear. "Dad, I'm serious. Caleb's family invited senators, donors, judges. His mother made it very clear the photos need to look refined. If you show up in that, everyone will stare." I almost laughed. "Stare because I serve my country? Because it's not their kind of thing. Their kind of thing." I had fixed broken engines in a desert that cooked the paint off vehicles. I had carried men out of places where the air smelled like burned metal and fear. I had written letters home to mothers who would never see their sons alive again. And now my own daughter was telling me my uniform didn't fit her kind of thing. I looked past her shoulder, toward the ballroom windows where white floral arrangements lined the aisle. "Emily, I'm walking you down that aisle in this uniform." She closed her eyes for a second like she was trying not to scream. "Then don't be surprised if people think you're trying to make a scene. I'm not making a scene. I'm standing in my own skin." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Dad, you're ruining my morning." Ruining her morning. I remembered another morning, 23 years earlier, when she was 6, and she had woken me before sunrise because she wanted pancakes in the shape of a star. Helen had been sick then. already losing the fight we both pretended we could win. Emily had climbed into my lap while I flipped the pancakes and whispered, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm never going to make you sad." I had kissed the top of her head and told her she didn't need to promise that. All I had ever wanted was for her to be happy. If that happiness had made her forget where she came from, I guess I had not realized how much that would hurt. I said, "Your mother would be ashamed of this." The words were out before I could stop them. Emily flinched like I had struck her. For a second, the parking lot went silent, except for the faint hum of traffic down the road. Then her face changed, and I saw something in it I did not understand at the time. Shame, yes, but also panic. Not the kind a bride feels about being late for pictures. The kind a person feels when the wrong truth is getting too close. "Don't bring Mom into this," she said. "I'm not the one who did." That's when Caleb stepped through the doorway and saw us. He was smiling until he noticed my uniform. Then the smile barely shifted, just enough for me to know it wasn't real. "Everything okay?" he asked, though his eyes were on Emily, not on me. "She's trying to wear that," Emily said, as if I weren't standing right there. Caleb gave me a polite little nod. "Sir, I know this is important to you, but Emily and I really wanted a certain look for today." "A certain look," I repeated. He spread his hands. "We're going for timeless, elegant, classic." I stared at him. "And my service isn't classic?" His smile thinned. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." Emily's cheeks flushed bright red. "Dad, stop it." I looked at her, then at him, then back at the white flowers reflected in the glass. My own daughter had invited me to her wedding and was ashamed to be seen with me in the only formal uniform I had left. And her fiancé stood there like he was discussing table settings. Something in me wanted to turn around and drive home, to put the uniform back in the closet, to ignore all of it and go sit on the porch with the old dog and the ache in my knees and pretend this day didn't matter. But I had already learned, long ago, that the moments that hurt the most are often the ones that matter the most. So I said, "Fine." Emily let out a relieved breath so fast it sounded like a laugh. "Thank you." I lifted a finger. "But I'm not wearing a suit." Her face changed again. "Dad, I'm wearing this. If that embarrasses you, that's something you're going to have to live with." Caleb cleared his throat. "We can discuss this later." "No," I said. "We can discuss it now." But Emily had already turned away, the back of her hand at her mouth, as if she could wipe away the whole conversation by touching her face. "I have to get ready," she muttered. "Please, don't do anything weird." Then she was gone, her white robe flaring behind her as she hurried back inside. I stood there in the parking lot longer than I should have, staring after her. I should tell you that this was the first time my daughter had ever disappointed me, but it wasn't. It was just the first time she had done it in public. 3 months earlier, she had asked me to help pay for the wedding because Caleb's family was covering most of it, but there were some gaps. She had called me from a boutique with tears in her voice, saying the venue had raised the price, the florist needed a deposit, and the photographer was the best in the city. She said she didn't want anything extravagant, just a beautiful day. I told her I could help. I didn't have a fortune. I was a retired Marine gunnery sergeant living off my pension, my savings, and the little house Helen and I had bought before the mortgage rates climbed into the sky. But I had enough to make my daughter's life easier. That's what a parent does. You make what you have stretch as far as you can. So I wrote checks. One for the flowers, one for the rehearsal dinner, one for the extra catering the Mercers insisted on because their guests expected certain standards. I even agreed to co-sign a temporary line of credit through the credit union because Caleb said one of his accounts was tied up and he needed liquidity until after his bonus hit. That was the first thing that should have bothered me. The second was when Emily asked me to put the house in her name for estate planning purposes, because she said if anything happened to me, probate could be a nightmare. She said it casually, over coffee, like she was asking me to pass the sugar. I hadn't done it. Not because I suspected her. At the time, I just wasn't ready to touch anything that had Helen's fingerprints on it. The house was the last place my wife had stood. The kitchen counter still had the small chip in the corner where Emily dropped a bowl at age 9. The back bedroom still had Helen's sewing machine in it, covered with a white cloth. I wasn't ready to hand over the keys to anyone, even my own child. That night, after Emily and Caleb had gone home, I sat alone in the kitchen with the yellow envelope Helen had told me to open when love starts looking like a transaction. She had written that in her own handwriting on the front, years before she died, back when she knew her sickness was teaching us all things we didn't want to learn. I had never opened it. I did that night. Inside was a letter from Helen, written in her neat, slanting script. If you ever feel ashamed of who you are, she had written, remember this. The people worth loving will not ask you to hide the things that made you strong. I read it 3 times. Then I put the letter back and called my old friend Dale, who had become a probate attorney after retirement. I hadn't bothered him in years, but that night I told him everything. The co-signing, the requests, the house, the way my daughter and her fiancé had started talking to me like I was a donor, not a father. Dale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Bob, don't sign another thing until I look at it. I asked him why. He said, because I don't like the sound of this. Neither did I. The next day, I went through the credit union paperwork line by line, and that was when I found it. My signature, or something meant to look like it, on a home equity application I had never signed. My daughter had used my financial information to try to borrow against the house. I sat at the table staring at the document until the paper blurred. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Then I saw the attached email from the lending office asking for a final confirmation and a copy of my ID. There was a reply from Caleb's address. Attached. A scan of my driver's license. I hadn't sent it. Emily had. The room felt smaller, the air denser. I called the credit union immediately. The woman on the phone sounded polite and bored until I told her I was the account holder and the signature on file was fraudulent. Then she sounded very awake. She told me they would freeze the application and start an investigation. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time with both hands on the table. Then I heard the truth, not all at once, but in pieces. Emily had not simply asked for help with the wedding. She and Caleb had planned to use my house to bankroll the whole thing. They had told the venue my home would serve as a family guarantee. They had promised Caleb's mother, a woman named Marianne Mercer, who wore pearls like armor, that after the wedding Emily would take care of her father's living situation. Living situation. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. I learned the rest by accident. 2 nights before the wedding, Emily had asked me to come early for the rehearsal dinner because she wanted a quiet moment with me. I arrived 20 minutes early and found the side door open. Voices drifted from the kitchen, where the caterers were still setting up. I was about to call out when I heard my name. And after the wedding, Marianne Mercer said, he'll be in no position to argue. Old men like that get confused. You just keep the papers in front of him and smile. Emily gave a nervous little laugh. Mom, he's not confused. Marianne's voice dropped lower, but I caught every word. Then you make him feel guilty. He's your father. That's easier. Caleb said, once the house is transferred, we can refinance and move him somewhere appropriate. An assisted living place. Somewhere quiet. A pause. Emily said nothing. Then Marianne continued, you don't want him living in the guest room while you're building your life. He'll interfere. Interfere? My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. Besides, Caleb said, with the same easy smile I had once believed in, your dad's always been proud of the uniform. Let him keep his medals. That doesn't change the fact that he's living in the past. There was a faint sound, maybe a glass set down too hard. Then Emily again, softer now. He's just hard to handle when he thinks he's right. I closed my eyes. I wanted to walk in there and wreck something. I wanted to throw the whole kitchen into the parking lot. But the thing that stopped me wasn't discipline or dignity. It was hearing my own daughter sound tired. Not guilty. Not angry. Tired. As if she had been living inside somebody else's plan so long, she no longer recognized her own voice. I left before anyone saw me. I drove home with my hands shaking. That night I called Dale again and told him everything. He told me to come to his office first thing in the morning. So I did. We spent 3 hours going through paperwork. He found the forged application, the transfer request on my house, and a beneficiary form I had never seen before, on a small savings account Helen had opened years ago for one day. Emily had somehow gained access to it. Not enough to empty it completely, but enough to prove she had been digging. Dale's face darkened as he read. "Bob," he said carefully, "your daughter and her fiancé are trying to corner you financially." I felt like somebody had struck a match in my chest. Why? Dale leaned back. Because some people don't see family as family. They see family as leverage. That was the first time I said the words out loud. "Then they won't get another dollar." "Good," Dale said. "And if you want, we can make sure they don't get the house either." That night, I made my decision. I was still going to the wedding. I was still wearing my uniform. And I was going to stop pretending that love meant surrender. By the time I reached the venue again that morning, the parking lot was full of luxury cars, black sedans, white SUVs, a silver Bentley that looked like it had never driven through rain in its life. People in bright dresses moved between the flower arches and the valet stand, carrying themselves like this was a magazine shoot instead of a marriage. Emily had asked for a small ceremony. What she meant was a small ceremony with very expensive people. I stepped out of my truck and adjusted my cap. For a moment I thought about my wife's letter, folded in my breast pocket. The doors opened before I reached them. Emily came toward me in her gown, her face gone pale when she saw I was still in uniform. Up close, she looked beautiful in the way brides are supposed to look beautiful, and miserable in the way daughters look when they know they've already said too much. "Dad," she hissed, "I told you not to wear that, and I told you I would. Why are you doing this to me?" I stared at her. "You mean, why am I standing in the clothes that represent the life you used to be proud of?" She looked around quickly, eyes darting toward the guests. People are staring. Let them stare. Caleb's mother is going to lose her mind. I know. That made her pause. "I know about the house," I said. Her face emptied of color so fast, I thought for a second she might collapse. "What?" "The application, the forged signature, the little conversation I heard in the kitchen." She shook her head once, too quickly. "Dad, I can explain." "Then explain why your fiancé and his mother were discussing where to put me after the wedding." Her mouth opened, then closed. It was answer enough. A muscle ticked in my jaw. "You were going to move me out." "No," she said, but it came out weak, almost childish. "Not like that." I laughed once, bitterly. "Not like that? Emily?" They said assisted living. She stared at me, and in that moment I could see the war inside her. The daughter I raised was in there somewhere, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. But she was buried under something ugly and expensive and badly chosen. "It was just temporary," she whispered. "Caleb said once the wedding was over, we'd be able to help you with the house, and you could live somewhere easier." "Easier for who?" Her eyes filled with tears. I wish I could say that was the moment she woke up. It wasn't. She was still trying to keep the whole house of cards standing. "Dad, please," she said. "This is not the time." "Funny," I said. "That's what your mother said about every lie that ever mattered." Then I did something I had not planned to do. I reached into my pocket and handed her the envelope from Helen. Her fingers trembled as she took it. "What is this?" "Something your mother wrote a long time ago." "Read it later." She stared at the envelope, confused, but before she could ask more, a bridesmaid hurried over to announce that the photographer was ready for family pictures. Emily wiped at her face fast, too fast, and turned away from me without another word. That should have been the end of my part in the day. It wasn't. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way expensive things are often beautiful. White roses, warm candlelight, soft music. The kind of setup that makes people believe nothing can possibly go wrong because too much money has already been spent to allow it. I walked Emily down the aisle in my dress blues anyway. The look on Marianne Mercer's face could have curdled milk. She sat in the front row in a pale gold dress and a hat too fancy for common sense, staring at my uniform as if I had personally dragged mud across her imported carpet. Caleb looked less bothered, though there was a tightness around his mouth that told me he was irritated by every metal on my chest. He was standing there in a tuxedo, so perfectly fitted it looked machine-made, his hands folded like he had been taught to look humble for photographs. Emily's eyes were wet the entire walk. At the altar, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Please, don't make this worse." I looked at her and answered, "You did that part yourself." I took my seat. The officiant began speaking about love and partnership and the joining of two families. I listened without hearing much of it. I was watching Caleb instead. He kept glancing at the front row where his mother sat, and I recognized that look. I had seen it in officers who cared more about promotion than people. It was the look of someone who had memorized how to appear decent. When the vows came, Emily's voice shook but held. Caleb's was smooth as glass. Then, just as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a sound came from the back of the hall. A sharp, electronic chirp. Everyone turned. A man in a gray suit was standing near the entryway, holding up a phone with an expression that said he was deeply annoyed to be there. It was Dale. My daughter's head snapped toward him. "Dad?" she whispered. I stood. The room fell completely silent. Dale walked down the aisle, not fast, not slow, carrying a black folder under one arm. The guests shifted in their seats. Marianne Mercer's eyes narrowed. Caleb's face changed first into confusion, then irritation, then something much worse. Fear. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Dale said, though he sounded like a man who was not sorry at all. "But I need to speak with Robert Hayes before any gifts are exchanged." Marianne stood halfway out of her seat. "This is inappropriate." Dale gave her one polite glance and opened the folder. "What's inappropriate is using a retired Marine's identity to secure a loan on his home." The room did not move. Nobody even breathed. Emily's mouth opened. Caleb's went pale. I felt every eye turn toward me. Dale continued in a level voice. "I represent Mr. Hayes. Yesterday we filed a formal fraud report with the credit union regarding a forged home equity application submitted under his name. The application was attached to a wedding expense package and routed through multiple accounts. We also have documentation showing unauthorized access to a savings account opened by Mr. Hayes' late wife." Marianne made a choking sound. "This is absurd." "No," Dale said. "This is paper." A couple of guests gasped. Someone dropped a champagne flute. The officiant looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Caleb stepped forward, voice strained. "There must be some misunderstanding." Dale looked at him. "Mr. Mercer, there is no misunderstanding. Your emails are attached." The silence that followed had a weight to it. I could feel it pressing on my chest. Emily turned toward Caleb so fast I thought her neck might snap. "Emails?" He looked at her like a man trapped in a room with the lights coming on. "Emily, I can explain," but she was already shaking her head. "You said it was temporary." "It was," he said too quickly. "We were only trying to help." "Help?" I repeated. "By forging my signature?" His eyes flicked to me, then away. Dale raised the folder again. "There's more." That got everyone's attention. He pulled out a page and read. At 8:14 p.m. on Tuesday, Mr. Mercer texted his mother. "Once the house is secured, Bob won't have a choice." Marianne's face turned hard. "That's out of context." Dale didn't blink. "At 8:17 p.m., you replied. He'll do what's best if you keep him distracted." A murmur rippled through the guests. Emily looked like she was trying to stand inside an earthquake and pretend it was a bad dream. Marianne rose fully now, chin high, voice icy. "This is a family matter." "Then maybe," Dale said, "you should have treated Robert Hayes like family." One of the senators, seated near the front, slowly removed his glasses. A judge leaned toward his wife and whispered something I couldn't hear. The photographer lowered his camera, realizing no flash could improve this. I stepped forward before anyone else could. "Caleb." I said, and my voice was calm enough to scare even me. Did you think I wouldn't notice? He swallowed. Sir, it was a bad idea. We were under pressure. From who? He hesitated. Marianne answered for him. From reality. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Reality is, you tried to steal my house. Emily flinched. Dad, I didn't know it was that serious. I turned to look at her. Really look at her. You signed papers you didn't read. She started crying then, silent tears that ruined her makeup in seconds. I thought it was for us. I thought once we were married, we would take care of you. By moving me out? That wasn't my idea. Then whose idea was it? She looked at Caleb. That was all the answer the room needed. The groom's face tightened, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had counted on others not being smart enough to check his work. The officiant took a step back. Should we continue? Nobody answered him. I looked at Emily. Her mascara was streaking now, her hands still clutching the bouquet. She looked less like a bride and more like a girl who had wandered too far from home and was finally seeing the road back. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I brought something too, I said. A few heads turned. Emily stared at me. What is that? A copy of your mother's letter, and another document from Dale. Marianne folded her arms. I'm sure we all have enough paperwork for one day. You do, I said, but you don't have my house. That got a louder reaction than anything else so far. Caleb's mother straightened so sharply I thought she might snap. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm saying the trust is changing. Emily's face went blank. Trust? Yes, Emily. The house, the small savings account, the policy your mother left behind, the things you assumed would be waiting when you decided to treat your father like a balance sheet. She shook her head. Dad, no. Yes. She looked at Dale in horror. You can't do that. Dale answered before I could. Actually, he can, and he did. The trust is being redirected. Redirected to who? Caleb barked. To a veterans housing fund, Dale said, and to a scholarship program for military families. Miss Hayes, your father signed the amended documents this morning. The room went still again. Emily looked at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. You gave away my inheritance? I looked her straight in the eye. You tried to use my inheritance to buy a wedding neither of you could afford. That's not fair. No, I said softly. What's not fair is burying your mother, building a home, serving this country, and then being told to stand in the corner because your uniform doesn't fit the decor. That line landed hard. Even Marianne looked away. Emily's mouth trembled. Dad, please. I could see the apology trying to find its way out of her, but pride was still holding the door shut. So I said the things she needed to hear, even if she hated me for it. I love you, I told her. That was never the problem. The problem is, you thought love meant I'd let you use me. Her face crumpled completely then, and she covered it with both hands. Caleb stepped toward her, perhaps thinking he could still salvage the moment. Emily, come on, we can fix this later. But Dale held up one more sheet of paper. There's no later for the pending fraud report. The credit union has already frozen the line of credit. The venue has been notified that the guarantee is invalid, and I strongly suggest you do not attempt to charge anything else to Robert Hayes' name. Caleb stared at him. You can't do that. I already did. The sound that went through the room was not loud, but it was unforgettable. It was the sound of a life built on pretending, cracking right down the middle. Marianne looked at me with raw, furious disbelief. You would do this to your own daughter? I turned toward her. No, your son tried to do it for me. For the first time, Marianne did not have a prepared answer. The officiant quietly set down his notes. One of the bridesmaids began crying. The judge in the front row stood up, muttered an apology to nobody in particular, and walked out. Within seconds, the room filled with whispers so sharp they sounded like static. Emily lowered her hands and looked at me. Her eyes were red, her face ruined, and for the first time that day, she looked young again. Not spoiled, not polished, just young and scared and embarrassed. Dad, she said, her voice breaking, did Mom know? I pulled the envelope from my pocket and handed it to her again. She knew enough to warn me. Emily opened it with shaking fingers. Her eyes moved across the page. Once. Twice. Then her whole body folded inward. She made a small sound I will never forget, halfway between a sob and a child's breath after falling down hard. Helen's words had found their mark. The rest of the room blurred after that. I remember Caleb arguing with his mother outside the hall. I remember the caterer asking quietly whether the dinner should still be served. I remember the florist standing beside the altar with tears in her eyes, because she had spent 3 days arranging roses for a wedding that had just become a public unraveling. I remember Emily stepping off the platform in her wedding dress and whispering, "I need to sit down." I told her she could sit in the back room if she wanted. She did. By then, Caleb's mask was gone. He was angry now, not elegant. He accused me of humiliation, of sabotage, of ruining what was supposed to be the biggest day of their lives. I looked at him and said, "You did that yourself, when you thought my love came with a signature line." He had no answer. His mother did, of course. People like Marianne always do. "This is all just some military pride nonsense," she snapped. I turned to her. "No, ma'am. This is a lesson in consequences." She stared at me, breathing hard, pearls rising and falling against her throat. Then, to everyone's surprise except mine, the woman nearest the back row, who had been sitting quietly the entire ceremony, stood up. She was one of Helen's older sisters, Aunt Ruth, who had flown in from Ohio and said almost nothing all weekend, because she liked to observe before she spoke. Ruth walked down the aisle in a pale blue suit and stopped next to me. "You know," she said to Marianne, "my sister Helen always said the difference between class and costume is what happens when the mask comes off." No one had a reply for that either. The guests slowly began to leave. Not all at once, but in the awkward, embarrassed trickle that follows a disaster no one wants to admit they witnessed. Phones were tucked away. Clusters of whispers formed near the doors. At least one of the senators looked pleased to be seen escaping. The photographer packed his equipment with the solemn expression of a man who knew his album had just become a cautionary tale. I stayed where I was until the last of the crowd had gone. Then I went to find my daughter. She was sitting alone in the bridal suite, her dress pooled around her like spilled milk, Helen's letter in her lap. When I stepped inside, she looked up quickly, wiping at her cheeks. "I ruined everything," she whispered. "You didn't do it alone." She gave a broken laugh. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." That got her attention. I pulled a chair over and sat down across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Outside, somewhere down the hall, I heard a door slam. Probably Caleb, maybe Marianne. Maybe the world ending for people who thought it would always be gentle with them. Emily finally said, "I didn't think they were serious about the house." I nodded once. "Yes, you did." She looked down. I think," I said slowly, "you hoped they weren't serious." That was the truth, and she knew it. Her shoulders began to shake. "I wanted this to work. He made everything feel bigger, better, like I was finally stepping into the life I was supposed to have. And what life was that?" She swallowed. "The one where people don't look at me and see a dead mother, a tired father, and a small house with peeling paint. There it was. The real wound, not greed by itself. Shame, the dangerous kind. The kind that makes people trade away the people who loved them for the illusion of being admired by strangers." I leaned back and let that sink in. Then I said, "Emily, I never needed you to be impressed by my life. I needed you to respect it." Her eyes filled again. "I know. You do now." She nodded, crying silently. I took a breath. "Your mother wrote that letter because she knew one day somebody would make you feel like you had to choose between where you came from and where you were going. That's a lie people tell when they want something from you." Emily squeezed the paper in her hands. "I should have trusted you," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You should have. Can you ever forgive me?" That was the hardest question she had ever asked me. I looked at her for a long time before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to become someone I can trust again. She nodded through tears. I am. No more lies. No more signing things you don't understand. No more letting someone else talk for you. I won't. And if Caleb comes back calling himself a victim, you remember this day exactly as it was. She gave a weak, miserable laugh. I think I'll remember. When I stood to leave, she grabbed my hand. Dad? I turned. She was staring at the uniform. I used to be proud of that, she whispered. I don't know when I stopped. You stopped when you let someone else tell you it was less important than their image. The words hurt her, and I knew that. But hard truths are sometimes the only kind that cut deep enough to heal. I opened the suite door, then paused and looked back at her. Your mother would still want you at the table, I said. Just not as somebody's accessory. She nodded, pressing the envelope to her chest. The wedding did not continue. That same afternoon, the venue manager informed Caleb's family that every unpaid deposit was due immediately. The credit union blocked the line of credit before sunset. Marianne tried to argue that the wedding contract should be honored because the event had technically started, but the venue's legal department was already involved. By Monday, there were calls from the bank, the caterer, and at least one very unfriendly attorney. The news spread the way ugly truths always do in a town full of polished faces, quietly, then all at once. Within a week, Caleb's firm launched an internal review after questions were raised about the forged financial documents attached to the loan. Marianne's social circle turned cold. The judge who had attended the wedding declined future invitations. The senator's office said no comment, which in politics usually means they've already decided they're not standing near you when the smoke starts. Emily moved back home 2 days later with one suitcase and her work laptop. She did not ask to keep the dress. She said she never wanted to see it again. She also didn't ask for the house or the savings or anything else that had once seemed so important when she thought wealth could protect her from embarrassment. For the first few days, she barely spoke. She slept in her old room, cried in the shower, and stayed away from mirrors. I let her. Some shame has to burn out on its own. On the 5th night, I found her in the kitchen reading Helen's letter again. She looked up when I came in. Mom knew me better than I knew myself. Your mother was annoyingly wise. That got the smallest smile I had seen from her in a long time. Dad, she said after a moment, I want to pay you back. I set down my coffee. You will. Not with money. With what then? With honesty. With work. With time. With proving you can stand up straight even when nobody is impressed. She nodded, eyes wet again. I can do that. I believed she meant it. It took months, not days, for the damage to stop echoing. Caleb disappeared from her life with the speed of a man who had never intended to carry any weight once the party ended. Marianne, last I heard, was trying to keep up appearances in a neighborhood where people had started looking at her a little too carefully. As for the legal mess, Dale handled that with the kind of calm precision that comes from spending a lifetime watching people underestimate paper until the paper buries them. Emily never went back to the life she thought she wanted. She found a job with a small nonprofit that helped military families with housing and paperwork. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. At first, she hated that work, because it reminded her how close she had come to becoming the kind of person who profits from other people's service. Then, slowly, it changed her. She learned to sit with veterans and listen instead of judging. She learned how many families were one missed paycheck away from losing the roof over their heads. She learned that dignity is not the same thing as status. And one Sunday morning, nearly 4 months after the wedding that never finished, she asked me to wear the uniform again. We were driving to the Veterans Memorial outside town. The sky was bright and cold, and the grass had that early fall shine that makes everything look cleaner than it is. I had nearly said no out of habit, but when I looked over and saw how nervous she was, I understood what she was asking. Not for attention, for forgiveness. So I wore it. She cried when she saw me come out of the bedroom in full dress blues, but this time the tears were different. She stood in the driveway with both hands over her mouth and whispered, You look like yourself. I am myself. She shook her head, smiling through tears. No, better than that. You look like the man I should have never been ashamed of. I almost told her that wasn't necessary. Then I realized it was. At the memorial, she walked beside me in a plain dark coat, no jewelry, no performance, no one watching, except the names carved into stone and the families who understood what sacrifice cost. She placed Helen's letter under the wreath we left there, then stood at attention while I saluted. Afterward, when the wind was cold and the sun was low, Emily slipped her hand into mine. Dad? Yeah? I read Mom's letter enough times to know the part I wasn't ready to hear. I looked at her. Which part? That love isn't a contract. I squeezed her hand once. Your mother had a way with a sentence. Emily laughed softly, wiping her eyes. I know.